Sure. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, it's a joy to be together with you and with each other. And we thank you for the fellowship that we can share in this time together. Lord, thank you for who you are and what you are doing in our world, and that you include us in. We so much appreciate the work of the Holy Spirit in our lives. We think of that Lord, throughout the year, but this time of year in particular, we're reminded of that ministry. And we pray, Holy Spirit, that you'll come and direct our thoughts and our words as we share together here today. And we ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
Good. So we continue our journey in the series of 12 books edited by T.F. Torrance, titled Science and Theology, Theology and Science, The Frontiers of Knowledge. Largely written in the mid-'80s. This particular volume we're looking at today, 1986. So all of you, I assume, can remember back to 1986 and what you were doing back then. So it's a few decades ago. So the question, how much of what's in this book still pertains to the conversation today, and hopefully quite a bit of it. And what more can be added is a whole nother question. How does the conversation TF wanted to start then helping inform the conversation in which we find ourselves today between theology and science? So this book, particularly Science and Theology in Einstein's Perspective, which is volume 3, there was one of the people who were critiquing this book who said, throughout the book, he in a sense is putting Einstein and Athanasius in conversation. Why didn't he include Athanasius in the title? Which in a sense would have made a nice theology and science kind of conversation. But Athanasius is a conversation partner in this book. So first of all, does anybody have any initial impressions on what you were able to read? I don't know if some of you have the book or if you were just reading the sections that I was able to post for you or what. So what impressions did you get in your first pass by the material? Ken's got the book, it looks like.
No, actually, I discovered like yesterday morning that this book, which has a very similar title, is an earlier book that Iain Paul did, essentially a gathering of articles. Can you, everybody hear me okay?
I can.
My
Yes,
volume.
Ken.
Okay. He did a series of articles for a Northern Irish periodical on science, theology, and Einstein. And apparently Tom really liked it. And so he recommended that it be picked up, assembled into a hardback book and published as the one initial volume of his Theology and Science in Dialogue series. And it is actually Library of Congress as such. But this is 1982.
82, yeah.
And the book you're all looking at is
86.
like 86. So,
yeah.
And in the middle of his preface to your book, he says, let's consider this book, the one you're reading, as a sequel to this book. This book really is much more rough hewn. It's got very short chapters. It's choppy. It's poorly edited, even though it's Oxford University Press. But I thought I had the book. Until I saw, Marty, your detailed analysis, the contents, that's not the book I've got. So I did read the excerpt you sent for us. Thank you. Good. But Iain had these two books, and as far as I can tell, he did not have any additional books before he died. Ah, yes, right. Thank you. Calvin, Einstein, and Polanyi. You're right. I did see that.
1987, that book was written. Yeah, Knowledge of God, Calvin, Einstein, and Polanyi by Iain Paul. That is also published. Well, that's published by the Scottish Academic Press.
Yeah.
So that is a third book. And then Tim Zark found, I think it's his doctoral dissertation, which was also 1982 is the date on that. So that's a fourth piece of Iain Paul's work that can be found. So there are at least 4 that are worth considering if you want to do more extensive kind of research in his work. Thank you for pointing that out, Ken.
Right, right. Just to get that clear, because I think at one point the Library of Congress number was the same for both volumes. Okay, no,
Right.
it's 2 different books.
And just to note on that book, that is one of 5, as you noted, that T.F. Torrance also edited, like this 12. I didn't realize there was another set of 5, or I might have done them first, but
Yeah,
in 2024, I will go through the 5 books that are part of that series, which will
Okay.
include that one once a month. And T.F. Torrance also has one book in that series as well. So Ted, that was just a thumbs up, not a question or wanting to say something. Is that true? I saw that thumb up, and
I think I was Todd to put the thumb up, but
it was showing up on your screen. So
oh, it was okay.
maybe
Oh.
Todd liked you or something. He was saying,
No,
That could be,
Ted,
yeah.
that was a thumb like the fawn saying Happy Days. Hey, I'm so cool.
Well, your question was what stood out, and I just have the excerpts that you said. I've not read the whole thing, but one of the key statements that it really resonated with me is discussing how both science and theology are grounded in faith.
mhm.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure you'd have some scientists who would object to that statement,
Well,
and
there
maybe
is
some
objective-
theologians too. So,
Yeah, and
well,
that
one
is
has to define what it means first, right?
well, there you go. There you go.
that is
Yeah.
the topic of discussion.
That is it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
That
it
is
is.
the
Yep.
topic of chapter 1 in a sense, though we're going to
Right.
begin with a few comments before even chapter 1. But good. No, I think it's good, and I'm glad that the outline was helpful to
Yes.
begin
Thank you.
engaging the nature of the book. Anyone else have any initial impressions? The other thing I'm wanting to learn is if what I'm giving you is helpful, I don't want to give you too much, but I want to give you enough that you feel like you're able to enter in. Bryden, I see that hand.
I'm struck by the parallels in your summary, and that's all I have, so I'm sorry, between Divine and Contingent Order by T.F. Torrance, where the whole thing is, demonstrating the deep rationality of God's covenant faithfulness on the one hand, his freedom on the other, and faithfulness and rationality are actually saying the same kinds of things in relation to rationality and order. And I mean, it is staggering that the commensurate natures of these two things is not out into the public domain. I mean, that's where it belongs. It's extraordinary how blinded we have culturally become. And it's sad, really. It's very sad.
Yes, I would agree with that. I mean, I do have many points in this book. It's like this could have been written by T.F. Torrance himself. I mean, I don't know who had read who first, but I would sense that Iain read Torrance, and that much of what it is that we find here echoing those things is because of Torrance. But there certainly is a sense in which reading the Torrance and this together is an enriching endeavor, because I think there is a simplicity of language in Paul's work that I sometimes find easier than Torrance's work. I see that hand, Ken.
Yeah, it was just to say, when I was in New College in like 1973, 74, the contents of these comments were more or less what Tom was saying in his lectures in dogmatics. He was doing essentially the epistemology of dogmatics, and other than there's no mention in Paul about Bologna just yet, whereas Tom was working Bologna in frequently. The gist of it was, I would very much think that Dr. Paul, as a chemist, was drawn to Tom and what he and others like him were, like James Clerk Maxwell, were saying about the unity of theology and science as epistemologically one rationality. That really was the claim. And then Tom had just published Theological Science, and it was all over the place. Everybody was reading it, and it was drawing a lot of graduate students to New College to study under him. And I was at New College when Iain Paul was at New College, but I'm sorry, without a composite photograph, I could not identify him.
Right.
But
I didn't do research to see if he's still alive or not. It's possible.
No, I'm sorry. He died about 10 years ago.
10 years ago. Okay.
Premature. He was like 72 years old. He retired with poor health in the 1990s and died about 2002, 2003. So,
Okay.
That's
Right.
2012, 2013.
Right. Which the second book by Nesselbeck, he also died early. And people have commented it would have been nice if he could have gone on and developed some of his ideas. So we don't want to assume that writing these books led to early death or anything like that. But
No.
yes. Good. Well, it's interesting to hear the stories and to recognize just the influence that T.F. Torrance had on these young scholars who were interested in science and theology, and that they went on to have successful careers and write books that have made a contribution. And part of the delight of what we're doing is we're bringing them back out into the open so that people have exposure to them and can keep the conversation going, because it's easy, I think, for them to get lost. So, yeah. Any other comments before I'm going to read just a little bit out of T.F. Torrance's foreword here? Bill, I see your hand there.
Maybe we should wait until you get to page 12. But it's that quote. You didn't mention a quote on bottom of page 12 by Einstein. I just wanted to mention. I can wait until we get there if you wish.
Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and take those things in context maybe, and the flow with getting if we can have a sense of the flow of the book and how Einstein is integrated and woven into it. It'd be great if people can walk away with a sense that there's a logic in the book. It's a very Torrancean kind of logic, but it also has a simplicity to it that Paul brings to it that I think is a helpful kind of outline. So I'm just looking in the general foreword. There's basically one paragraph that T.F. Torrance writes that is specific to this book. He has this general foreword in all of the books, but adds a paragraph or two that specifically refers to the book. So in this book, Dr. Iain Paul, who holds doctors in both physical science and systematic theology, explores the epistemological interrelations between natural science and theology. And just to note, so epistemology, the whole sense of how we come to know what we know. He's not as much dealing with the ontology of God, because the nature of this conversation begins how, as communities of those who attempt to know and understand the world, how do we have tools that allow us to think together and not allow the disciplines, in a sense, to force us apart? So anyway, to say it is a book largely about epistemology. In an earlier work, Science, Theology, and Einstein, 1982, which is the book that Ken showed us just a moment ago, he turned his attention mainly upon natural science, but here lays his stress upon Christian theology. So again, Ken, you've looked through that book, and my sense is that he's trying to take a read on natural science in a Torrancean kind of way. He engages Einstein. Did you get any sense of this distinctive of that book focusing on natural science?
Yeah, now he is trying to use the presumed authority of Albert Einstein, who was essentially vindicated by E equals mc squared. That no one could criticize Albert Einstein's scientific credentials. He was the scientist of scientists. And to have someone like him say, do you realize that all science is essentially faith-based? It is trust-based. It does not contain within itself all of the axioms that it must assume in order to proceed with its work. Gödel's theorem. So that both the theological science and natural science are both credentially based, credo, faith-based exercises. So we cannot continue with, especially for Americans, this antithesis that science is fact-based and theology is faith-based, and never the two shall speak. Right. It is a totally false thing. And for him, as a scientist who is also a Christian, and I think an evangelical, conservative evangelical Christian, he found it extremely difficult to deal with his church mates, looking for the right word, people in his faith-based communities who said, you can either be a scientist or a Christian, but you cannot be both.
Oh, dear.
You do not understand science, and without being too sharp, you don't understand your own faith.
Yeah.
Seriously, you don't. He uses Einstein as the unimpeachable scientific authority to critique the positivism of a popular science in order to open it up to the possibility of a more relativistic science that is actually closer to the actual way science is done.
Yeah.
Any kind of fake stuff. Paul's first book, half the book is a romping criticism of the bad science of poor scientists who stand on the sciences they understand it, geology or anthropology or whatever science, and then criticize religion. And so that was he used, as I say, the authority of Albert Einstein to open up the pop version of science in the 1950s, 1960s to a far more accurate and humanistic sense of the way science is actually practiced, which opened everything up to a conversation between science and religion, and which was really what Tom really wanted. For anybody he worked with.
Yeah, TF saw himself as an evangelist, and particularly of theologians, but also of scientists who did not have the ground of pursuits to bring the two together in a way that would be a helpful dialogue. And I think that was certainly and overtly Paul's purpose in writing this book that we're looking at today. So thanks for that brief outline. There's a sense of not so much an apologetic as an advocacy is what I hear the first book is presenting. And I think that advocacy is a word that would also affirm for what this book is about as well. So Torrance goes on to say in this introduction, his aim is to offer a discussion unencumbered by technicalities, which will help to dismantle inbuilt prejudices of scientists against theology and of theologians against science, by drawing out the implications of new perspectives in the structure of knowledge brought about by Albert Einstein. The words I want to particularly highlight there, dismantle inbuilt prejudices. So to note that the nature of both the theologian as well as the scientist, who comes with a set of beliefs, that they can't kind of acknowledge that they are a set of beliefs that exclude upfront listening to the other, that is the nature of the pre-judgment that excludes, which of course prejudge is the basis of the word prejudice. So to recognize that that takes on issues both in this debate. In the United States right now, the political divides in some ways, some I'd say are holding on to what they consider the faith, and others are holding on to what they would call science. And it's almost a playing out of the prejudice of really working together and listening together in what it would mean to be a United States who thinks as a people of faith and science together in a way that I think that Paul is advocating for in this book. So to say when we break those things apart, nations can fall apart. And so the prejudice, to acknowledge the prejudicial statement is significant. The other thing that I think is worth noting is that the word prejudice, in a sense, is reflective of what both Bart and Torrance would call natural theology. where in natural theology, one assumes that one has a perspective from which one stands and reads through that lens the prejudgment of what their lens gives them to read, and hence ends up with conclusions that basically confirm what they already believed. And so I would say natural theology, both for Barth and Torrance, when used in its improper ways, is simply a form of prejudice. These are used also between denominations and traditions within Christianity, where there's a prejudgment that is there, that comes in not able to listen because one hears one's voice so loudly that one cannot hear the other. And hence the work of this book, I'd say, is both for the science and theology conversation, but also within theology and within the sciences. Not all sciences necessarily listen all the time. So Duane notes science is a religion as well. And we're going to play out that the question of, what is a religion, what is a science, is an important question to bring forward. And Bryden says, the awkward tragedy is most folk don't have the tools to examine and refine their prejudices. And that is absolutely true. And so one of the questions is, the nature of the church, and what I would call the church in its therapeutic role. If therapy is to bring us to a healthy way of being with the world, with God, and one another, the church, in preaching the gospel and recognizing that there are these prejudices that are there, could help us to engage the one who is the truth and to ask, how does the judgment of who Jesus is on the created order of the world, the nature of the human community at large, as well as within specific nations, as well as persons within those communities, how do we think with Jesus in that so that our prejudices are, as he says it here, dismantled? John McMurray said, my life as a philosopher is committed to disillusioning people. And I think if we see the word disillusioning and dismantle, that is to say that these thinkers recognize that there is a work of taking down or taking apart those things that have become walls to an appropriate engagement with the reality of who God is, who we are as humans, how we live in the world, and all these things. So there is, I call that, a therapeutic, dismantle sounds like a construction site or taking apart something is there. And all of them are at some level fit metaphors to begin the conversation, but they need broader conversations to really see how they apply in the specific places or the tasks of a church community, and what is it that holds us back from really participating in what God is doing in this church and through this church in the communities in which we reside. So anyway, I think it's just important to note those words, dismantling inbuilt prejudices, and that both scientists and theologians, pastors, and those who are technicians of science, all of them have those things built in. And so this book is an invitation to recognize what gets in the way and then to invite something beyond that. And that in the end, that is an engagement to a more rich engagement with reality itself, which for scientists includes the whole of the universe and the God who is living and active, as well as for Christians to recognize that to just stay inside the church and think inside the church and not see the world as also beloved of God is to have erected a wall that maybe needs to be taken down. Just continuing the last part of the paragraph then, science and theology are shown to have wide areas of mutual concern in their respective inquiries, but the argument is carried further to reveal that this mutual concern reaches beyond questions of formal method in research into material content and controlling ideas. With all the differences imposed by the distinctive natures of their fields, they are found to work with fundamental conceptions which can be parallel to each other in such a way as to help scientists and theologians to understand and appreciate one another in a fresh and rather enlightening way. So understanding and appreciating, and the appreciating is, half the battle. The whole sense of, I'm willing to listen to you and then say, you're giving me new eyes to see. I appreciate, even if I don't agree with you, I appreciate that you've given me another way to look at it. And I think even to do that moves beyond some what Ken was talking about and what what we find as people who get so locked into their ways that they can't see or hear anything else. So I just wondered, does anybody have any other comments or reflections either on what TF said here or kind of my opening kind of pointers as to what this book's opening for us?
Yeah, Marty.
Yep.
I think this is where that a priori versus a posteriori comes in, because I think fundamentally that's our number one problem, because a lot of our education is that we have to start with the idea that we already know what we're doing.
Yep.
And the other aspect too, I think, just thinking back to the way Carrie Magruder analyzed Tom's way of thinking, where part of the scientific process hits a challenge, because everything has to be understood from the order below is determined its meaning by the order above it, and how it's all integrated back to the creator and maker. So that's where the challenge comes in, and that's where, like, the scientist and the theologian is a very unique person. Scientists themselves are very unique, but you add that extra, because you're thinking in more than one domain, and you're cross-pollinating between levels of understanding that have their own language to show how the order above has its meaning, the order below has its meaning determined by the order above, and how it interrelates. You know, everything is made by, for, and through this one. John McKenna used to he started off with the word, you know, in the beginning was the word, and the word was God, and the word was with God, and that this whole use of logos and the redefinition of logos, because the way Christians can understand logos as the divine ordering person, not just a principle or a thought, but the divine ordering person that holds all things together. John worked hard at that stuff, trying to think that stuff through, and you know, he started off with being tutored by Tom, trying to understand John of Philoponus, and that whole, his scientific mind was way ahead and corresponds to where Einstein took us here in the late 20th century, and there's still a lot of stuff to be mined. Like his contemporaries there, the Aristotelian there for Philoponus, and they totally marginalized him, and then gave him that anathema. You're it's one thing to not be liked and your idea is not popular, but to go the full, you're an anathema.
Yeah.
and Tom was critical of, helping rediscover that whole train of scientific thought. Like, it's very important. His impetus theory and his understanding of light very much corresponds to where, where Einstein was, and rediscovering old ideas and getting past those preconceived notions, like, because it takes so long to become a student of the history of ideas. See, that's what makes you so useful as being the moderator, because you're very well versed in a number of different people's thoughts and different times, where not everybody has those skills, because you got to spend a lot of work is just understanding the ideas that have gone before, where you don't realize you're not inventing anything new. This has already been tried in different ways with various methods, and that's the one thing about our lives. They're not able to handle all this knowledge.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of good points you made there. One is that the word a priori is basically the same as prejudice. When somebody is working with an a priori set of ideas, they are coming with a prejudiced position. And so sometimes it's helpful when people don't understand the distinction between a priori, a posteriori, that is what is at stake. And I can't remember what the second thing was that I thought was but anyway, it'll come back to me. So it's helpful just to recognize then the nature of where it is we're going. Bryden has also mentioned this, the concerns about Einstein, Athanasius, and quantum theory, which that is going to come up in here. And it's part of the ongoing conversation where I recognize that as much as I've studied, I know how much I don't know about all these things, and how much more one can study John Philoponus and others and really gain insight that I know that I don't have yet. Oh, I remember the other thing was, you mentioned the Aristotelian thought, and for Philoponus, this fact that he was fighting against an a priori of Aristotelian logic is something that is true really in the whole history of theology. Thomas Aquinas, of course, largely worked in a framework of thought, insights that were based on the work of Aristotle, which in some ways we might say it helped, but to the degree to which it provided a format that stopped people from listening to the living God and called people to fit within a system of logic that was human-based, that becomes for Torrance a major concern of how we think today. And this is one of the things with John Webster in his later years, was looking more at Thomas Aquinas, and I haven't understood yet why he was doing that exactly, because it seems to be going in a direction that Torrance at least would have thought problematic. So anyway, thanks for those insights. And the word Kantian vocabulary, the whole Kantian vocabulary, that's a whole other prejudicial system, isn't it? The nature of Descartes and Kant, the nature of beginning with for Kant, the transcendental unity of apperception, that we view what's going on, and out of our ideas we interpret from within. I think, therefore I am, being a primary starting point within oneself, from which one then judges the world in a predetermined kind of way, beginning with the human center, determining, kind of what is true and how the system works. So these are all deep, deep cultural lenses. I'm thinking of Leslie Newbegin and his call for deep cultural mission. And that really went to the level of what it is that we're talking here when we go back to Aristotle and to Kant and to Descartes and these people who have formatted the Western mind. And, maybe particularly the individual as a judge of truth that has lost the sense of community, which is going to be so important in this book that we're looking at, that the nature of theology and science requires a community. The individual alone cannot be the judge of the truth. And if that is where we begin, we will collapse into a set of prejudices that will not move us in the direction we need to really engage the wholeness of reality. So I'm just going to look at a couple of statements here on the handout then. So under nutshell, once modern science is apprehended in terms of openness and realism, characteristic of the theology of Athanasius, and again, I'm arguing from what Paul is saying, and echoed in the writings of Einstein, so he sees there to be an echo there, Christians can penetrate to the hospitable behind the hostile appearances of modern scientific endeavors. And so again, there's an acknowledgement of a hostility, which there's a whole body of literature on the war or the battle between faith or religion and science. So Paul wants to argue here in this book that there is a place of openness and realism. So realism is the sense that there is a real world that we study, and that our ideas can't begin by breaking that apart, which Torrance calls dualism. He doesn't focus on dualism as much in this book, but once you break apart the world of ideas and the world of reality, you've already taken a misstep that in either case, if your quote unquote real world doesn't have the world of ideas to interpret it, then your experience of it will provide kind of its own reality, but it'll be really out of touch with the whole meaningfulness of reality. And if you have a world of ideas that don't really engage reality, then it becomes the cul-de-sac of the mind, and one, in a sense, departs from the community of humanity and the community of what God brings to us. And we are left in a place in ourselves that is separated from the reality that we would, I think, hope for, which I have had theologians who, when I talked about relational theology, said, well, I really believe that my religion's about, working on the inner life of who I am as a Christian. And it's like, okay, I'm fine with you working on the inner life, but if it doesn't include the nature of who we are engaging the world, including the sciences, but also the rest of the community, then it's following the Cartesian cul-de-sac, and we get stuck in our own minds and in our own heads. So one of the things that Paul is, I think, doing in the whole of this book is saying, if we're going to do good theology or good science, it has to be in community. And as several of you have mentioned, he doesn't include Polanyi in here, but that is certainly a Polanyian theme. What Polanyi calls the society of explorers is really the call for a community exercise, that it never collapses into one person or even a narrow school. It's certainly not just one discipline that doesn't exclude other scientific disciplines. So that's a nutshell of the whole book. For context, to say the ancient church, which Athanasius is the voice that he brings forward here, and Einstein, who's kind of the modern voice, are partners in reflecting on the created world and how we understand it. And when you use the word created world instead of environment, environment is kind of looking from the perspective of the human individual, whereas created world is already acknowledging a creator. So I find that helpful language to bring in. The book invites the modern reader to reunite for new insight on the frontiers of knowledge. Some still push back against this book, wanting to utilize natural theology or point out the issues of quantum theory. So I didn't give you all of the book reviews. I asked Carrie Magruder with each of these books to find for me what he can, book reviews that have been written on each of these books. So there were 2 of the 6 that he sent me where people said, you know, it appears that he's just a bit bashful or resistant to natural theology. He should have done that. And so to say that even with those people who maybe know Torrance and are certainly engaged in what's going on, they're still wanting somebody who's writing in the Torrance tradition to do more with natural theology, which is somewhat of an interesting issue. And then the whole issue of quantum theory, which again, Bryden has already brought up as an issue to be dealt with. This is one of those things where I don't know enough to be a good critique of what is missing with quantum theory within an Einsteinian form of science. And if anybody would like, can summarize that in a succinct kind of way, I'd love to hear it. What is missing since quantum theory has come along that calls into question the ability of Einstein's approach to make space for a fruitful, ongoing scientific adventure that also allows space for theology? Anybody want to jump on that?
Marty, do you want the conspiracy, or do you want fact-based rationalism?
Yeah, conspiracies is another set of prejudicial things. So
I'll give it a go in writing something and send it to you.
Okay. It's nice today to have a New Zealander and an Australian. James there is in Australia, so we're again just not only circling the world, we're branching out into all these wonderful countries. So
I do note that Paul, in his preface statement,
yes,
says that quantum theory was more intuition than proven fact when he was writing. But he said that's the way science works.
Yeah.
When assuming the quantum theory to be true, or a quantum theory to be true, was more productive than denying it. And that was a simple Hoyeristic judgment, pragmatic at its core. And he says that's the way science works. So there's no way to cite quantum theory as a block of established scientific fact that now refutes natural theology or supports natural theology. At the moment, everything is still too undefined. We are dealing with intuitions more than anything that's been established. When Paul was writing, and Paul was writing 40, 50 years ago. I don't know what more has been determined, but my news feed doesn't go off every day with new things about how quantum theory or string theory has been verified, refuted, adopted small children in a third world nation, anything of that kind of thing. Nothing has happened. It's just out there, very much on the far end of abstract speculation, which in many times is where for a lot of people is a very exciting stuff, until you find Wesley Crusher quoting it on Star Trek next generation. And you're going, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Somebody has just promoted a very educated guess into scientific fact. Don't know.
Good. So that's just a warning that there are people, and again, I don't know much about string theory or chaos theory. I know that there are conversations, and so to say, there are many things that are part of the modern world that if we can say that's an interesting conversation as we go along, we may learn more of what those things add to us. Multiple universe is another thing that shows up occasionally in these conversations. To say the nature of this book is dividing us into a realism of the universe as we know it, as we engage it, and to say there is a continuity that seems to imply that it's helpful to think of it as a unity, and that if there are divergences, we may find that even those divergences find a place within the conversation that will be helpful. So aspects of quantum theory becoming demonstrated and the CERN laboratory. So anyway, as we discover those things, there'll be things to add to the conversation. And even to understand the questions that they're asking, I think it's helpful just to say there are questions being asked, and we're fine with questions being asked because we want to be able to ask questions about the nature of who is God, what is Christianity, what is the church doing in the world today, because the curiosity piece is part of what it means to be scientific people. To proceed with wonder, I think, is what Einstein would say with that. All good science, I think Einstein said, begins with wonder. And so I think if our congregations begin with a sense of wonder about God, the world, and who we are in it, that's not a bad place to begin. And I will assume at some level that's what is happening even in this book. So in the preface, again, the word apprehended, and to recognize the difference between apprehend and comprehend. Apprehend means it's there, I see it, I don't fully understand it yet. Comprehend means I think I've got it figured out. So once again, modern science is apprehended in terms of the openness and realism characteristic of the theology of Athanasius and echoed in the writings of Einstein. So I think just to orient ourselves that the invitation of the book and the place as we move into conversations with other people is to appeal to the early church and Einstein, asking us to have this kind of openness, which means the closedness. Of course, there's a variety of ways that Torrance will talk about closed systems, container universe, all kinds of things that close a conversation that needs to stay open. So this book is looking for a more adequate apprehension of the world, a more adequate conversation about how we talk about what is known, and finding language that is both scientific and Christian, where we learn from each other because we gain new eyes to see what it is that is going on. So this book is part of a long conversation. I think that is a helpful way to begin that. There is a simple kind of a breakdown that John McMurray gave me that I think is helpful at this point in the conversation. Most people know of Martin Buber's I and thou. I can only be an I if there is a thou who enables me to be the I that I am. And so it's a simple definition of reality. And at some level, some people see it as a basic of what religion is. And Buber was Jewish, and so the nature of what it is that he wanted to do was to build an understanding that proper religion doesn't see the other as an it, but as a thou, as a person, and therefore we have the basis of the personal, which again, Torrance is certainly wanting to build on that in terms of this theological science. John McMurray says that the nature of art is where you have somebody who is being personal, I, but for a generalized thou. So whether it's a writer who's writing or a poet, whether it's a dancer who is dancing, whether it's a writer of music or a performer of music, in each case, a person shows up for what is a generalized audience. So he sees that as an I with a generalized thou. The nature of science, he then said, you still have a generalized thou, but you have the person who is doing the science attempting to be impersonal and it for a generalized thou. And so the nature still lives in this dynamic of one constituting the other. But if we read with Polanyi, there is no it for a scientist. The scientist is always a person who is speaking for a generalized thou. All science is the knowledge of persons speaking about the nature of the world and for a general audience at some level. And if you follow that thinking, then all science is the art of persons who engage the generalized world and write for the generalized world. Scientists are artists. Now, if you say that the nature of that world, in fact, is personal, then you would have what John McMurray would say is that religion is an I-thou relationship with specific others who are general, that one has to have specific persons, or it's not really what religion, and they're talking particularly about Christianity, he's talking about. But McMurray makes another move. He doesn't say I and thou, he puts the you first. So if the you is first, then the other, in this case, God for McMurray, the other establishes who I am. And now I think we're right in line with what this book is wanting to take us. It is to say that there is a you, that is the God who is there, and that as a community, we come and reason together to understand the God who is there as you, the world that is there as an it. But as Torrance talks about, we become a voice even for the created world. We become the priests of creation by talking about the created world as created by God, so that we are able to be stewards and caregivers for both God as well as the community of humanity. So I think this whole book lives helpfully within this whole sense of what it means to be persons, acknowledging the you-ness of God, the personalness of God. And John McMurray, in the end of his book, Persons in Relation, has a chapter of the personal universe where he says, we are faced with the decision of seeing either the universe as impersonal or personal. If it's impersonal, everything is by chance. Even the order of the world is all simply by chance, and meaning is impossible to be found. If the universe is personal, which would be seen by nature of who we are as persons, the orderliness of the universe, everything makes more sense. McMurray's move there, I think, with thinking of the universe as personal, is simply an acknowledgement that the whatness of what is there is because of the who-ness of what is there. And Paul's book is really bringing together the conversation of who we stand as those who interpret the world and see it with the God who is revealed and gives meaning and order, and that even for science, they are working with those assumptions. If they can't admit it, then it's it's the dismantling of their resistance that is necessary to be in the conversation. Did that make any sense to you? Okay, good. Because I think it's just helpful to get the ground upon which we're building here, both with Torrance as well as with Einstein and Athanasius and beyond. So then just looking at some of does anybody want to say anything at this point? But I'm going to be going into the outline of the book and looking at the introduction. So if you want to say anything of a broad scope before we dive into that. Dwayne, you had your hand up there. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to read something here for you guys. This is a book on science that John McKenna referred to one of his classes teaching. It's called Beyond the Cosmos by Hugh Ross. And Torrance has actually a note in there about in the book, like this guy was very much influenced by Tom in the pursuit of science. He works in cosmology, because that's the thing, because quantum is with the small mechanics, but cosmology is with the big things. But I just want to read something here, and this is the nature of the reality. The incompleteness theorem. The principle of incompleteness will be reflected in whatever model of origins proves most accurate in describing our universe's origin and characteristics. We humans can never discover and state all truths about the universe or demonstrate the totality of its consistency. Perfect insight into the physics of the cosmos will always remain beyond our capability. However, we come to know about the universe, or how much we come to know about the universe we will not be able to discover a theory of everything, for no rational models of the universe can be proven totally consistent and complete. And then he uses the analogy for theology and scientists. As God chooses to reveal to us through the Bible, so he chooses what to reveal to us through his creation, the words he declares through the heavens and the earth. in Moses' words, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed to us belong to us and our children forever. You know, and that's part of the problem, that because when one scientist is one person, one set of span of lifetime, you'll never comprehend, you know, and so hopefully the way the creation works, it'll lead you to understand that the creation was made by a loving God. It has meaning and purpose, and he set rules within it in which it can work both spiritually as well as physically, and you sort of have to think that stuff together. And you know, everyone's a theologian, just a question, or a scientist, just a question whether you're a good one or not, and that's the problem.
Right. Yeah, good. Thank you, Dwayne. Yeah, and so I mean, all of that, I just hear the call to humility. There's a ton that we still don't know, so let's humbly state what we do know, and let us reason together as theologians and scientists, and not shut one another out, but be in the conversation from the massive cosmos down to the most minute components within it. So thank you for that, pointing us in that direction. So in the introduction, then, this idea of science as slow art in a community. And so one thing I remember Alan Torrance once saying is that both science and theology function as a community when they're operating properly, and that community has a language that is true to that community. And if you don't learn the language of that community, you're likely not to understand it and hence to misread it. And the word faith, which Ted brought up, is again going to be one of those that we really have to pay attention to how we use that word. And then the other thing that Alan said is the whole nature of the history and understanding the history of what that community has come to believe. Polanyi also talks about this, as T.F. Torrance mentions it as well. So to say both science, natural science, and theology are communities with a history, with special language. And if you don't learn all three of those components and acknowledge them, you're likely to make a misstep. And so Paul is inviting us in the introduction to recognize and respect the nature of the communities, the language, and the history that lies behind them, so that we can go forward together. So the quote by Einstein, then, only one who has devoted his life to similar ends can have a similar realization of what has inspired these men. So that includes language and history, I think, that are certainly there, and also a passion to understand that, and give them the strength to remain true to their purpose in spite of countless failures. And we all know of great scientists who had to go for much of their life before they had a breakthrough that really opened up for us. Something like Edison, I think, had, he said, I don't have any mistakes, just a thousand attempts to get to the final conclusion. That's a recognition that these things don't always show up immediately. So to say the nature of the relationship between theology and science is that we recognize that there is a passion and interest that drives forward people who are like-minded, and that together they discover things that may not have been seen by themselves, and that only as a community can there be this moving on. And the invitation is that both science and theology can learn from each other and see more than they could have seen otherwise. Athanasius said, to turn away from the word of God, which is, and to fashion one that is not, is to fall to what is nothing. And one could say that makes everything, in a sense, no thing. So if we go with Athanasius, this theologian who is quite reverenced by T.F. Torrance, the word of God is a touchstone of reality. And the nature of science is to be willing to acknowledge the reality of God coming in human history, that there is a community who observes, who speaks, who finds language that becomes the text of the Old and New Testament, both preparing for as well as following up, and that the work of the church then is to be a scientific community who take the reality given in the person of Jesus Christ, the Word of God, and then witness to in the written word, the Word of God, and that engages us in reality. And if you leave from that, you in a sense are left to your own interpretation, and you end up with what we might call a fragmented world where everyone has their own opinion. Epinoia, Alan Torrance loves to say, epinoia is opinion, dianoia is to see through, particularly to see through Christ into the reality of God. And so indwelling might be seen as a parallel to that, the dianoia of the seeing by indwelling reality, so that you come to have reality teach you what is, and that's true by the spirit of knowing the God who is there. It's true of a husband knowing his wife, or a wife knowing their husband, that there is a dianoia of knowing through, and not merely sitting back with their opinion of how they succeed or fail without really being engaged in the relational dimension of it. And so at some level, this whole sense of engaging in the relational, which later in the book, the word intuition might be a way that we think about what's that, is there has to be an openness to the other that listens and then reflects and then tests that in light of reality to see that the reality of it is true there. So John McMurray is going to say, and TF doesn't exactly use that, but that what it is that Jesus teaches us about who God is and who we are because of that, as we live as though that is true, we are testing the reality of it in the relationality of our lives. And as we see that we are brought together with being fulfilled in ourself, of loving one another and being loved, the test is fulfilled in living in light of the reality of who God is as the one who made us as those kinds of beings. So that's just contra to the, I don't see God, therefore how can I believe in God? One has to look at the God revealed in Jesus, to live in the light of that God being one who has claimed that he will be present. Lo, I'm with you always to the end of the age. And that the scientific work that we're doing today is testing what it is that Jesus has said by his Spirit will be true. And in the living in the light of that, we are the laboratory of God. And the church is supposed to be the best laboratory possible, where the testing of is he faithful in being present as we learn to love and be loved by one another, and then bring that love to the world that he already loves. So point B then, passionate devotion is needed. And to say science is never without passion, and the nature of good theology should never be without passion. And both of them need to have an intellect that is at some level shaped by that passion. So one of the things that we have to break down is the idea that science is a kind of a dispassionate engagement with the world. And again, what Paul is bringing out here, and I think what Einstein affirms also, is that science is the passion to care for something to the degree that you'll pursue it, to apprehend it and understand what can be understood, recognizing, as Dwayne just pointed out, that you can't understand it all. But that doesn't mean you can't understand anything, and that you can't learn from others who have seen and understood what you maybe haven't. So point E then, opening lines. This book and the whole approach of this book is about opening lines of thought for fruitful dialogue between science and theology. So that's the introduction. I'm just going to be stopping at the end of each of the chapters to see if there's anything that you read in the chapter or that came out as I was talking that hits you as important to reflect on. Go ahead, Bryden.
I just love the word passion, because I find a lot of my confreres, shall we say, it's difficult after a long time of ministry to remain passionate. It's a bit like that letter to Ephesus in the book of Revelation. You know, we've lost our first love or something.
Yeah.
And that for me, I think, is a serious pastoral issue for some pastors and some theologians. You know, what is this first love passion that needs not necessarily stoking, but a kind of sense of, well, what happened to the wonder? You know, what happened to the passion? That's all. That's all I want to say, because there's a flip side to what you're saying about passion there.
Yeah, beautiful. Matt, I see that hand up there.
Just this,
Go for it.
I'm good. Just this section here on page 4, that I love his notion of seductive expediency, this idea of the pragma. This is back to what Brian was just saying too, that I think we can lose our first love in the church when we become so enamored with practical results, and we lose the connectivity with God. I mean, that sounds so simple, it feels almost stupid to say it, but it really isn't. It really is a real problem, you know. And he says the immoderate emphasis on practical results is atypical of those who are intimate with, I love that, the intimate with the demands of the discipline, that there's an intimacy here that's rich. I mean, that's really a rich point. So I just wanted to point that. I really thought that was fascinating, with a huge parallel for the church. And we could say falling in love with God, falling in love with the Trinity over and over again, you know, getting seduced by that more than with results, you know, whatever. So yeah.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Thank you. Yeah. There's a community just south of me here on the island called Circlewood, and they're attempting to build a community that has a concern for God's creation, but they have been given 40 acres of land, and they're having to learn what it means to care for the land itself. There are trees, and there's a forest that has not been cared for quite some time. And so because of their passion for being a community that actually lives what it speaks, they're having to learn, how do we care for this forest, and how do we take care of it for the animals that live here and all that. And but there is a passion, as you say, Bryden, that says, as God's people, if we're going to talk about caring, then we have to have a passion to really live it out. And it is their passion for the God who they serve that is actually driving it, and not just that it's a beautiful forest. And so I think to even recognize the way that scientists always have to have a passion for a particular area of subject, and that drives them. You know, they love the ocean, or they love the stars, or they love the healing of the human body, or there's something that they love, the idea that they can understand it and make a difference through that. And I think passion is a beautiful word for that. Polanyi, I think, describes it as the selectivity of a scientist is they choose something to focus on, and though they don't say it, they disinclude themselves from everything that could be chosen. But they still see themselves as part of the community of those who passionately choose what they will focus on. And part of the beauty is that the community is there, which I think it is Polanyi who says, and science doesn't have a pope. There is no one who sits above all of the scientists and says, this is right and that is wrong. The community itself lives as a mutually submissive community, each bringing its delight to work together to more fully understand the truth, and really wishes the church had more of that sensibility, that there is an uncontrollability by any particular person, but that together we are all pursuing the truth and to live in light of the truth, and that we are driven by the passion, the love that makes all that happen. And the word intimacy that Matt just used, to be intimately concerned with the reality of the world, that is the invitation that is there. The one other thing, Bryden, on just your word of passion is so much kind of, it's discounted as not being, you know, truly kind of rational. John McMurray, in his book, I'm doing a lot of McMurray stuff today because he pertains to a lot of what's going on here. In his book, Reason and Emotion, ultimately concludes that reason is simply highly developed emotion. That from the time we are a child, there are things that we pursue that taste good, that feel good, and there are things that hurt or don't taste good, and we learn to discern between them as our emotion is trained. We learn, I like this milk. I'm not so much liking that whiskey straight in large doses. Those others might be discerned in different ways with whiskey. But anyway, I've not learned to love whiskey quite yet, though I can sip it. But anyway, the whole idea that the nature even of a engineer, which we have Boeing engineers just a few miles from me here, an engineer is not an emotionless person. That's somebody whose emotions about what works for wings on planes and tensions has been so highly focused that they have a feel for what's going on and are be able to bring about a workable outcome. So the nature of reason is that we each have areas that we develop our emotions in, and we just call it reason. Well, what is that reason? Well, I have a feeling that this works and that doesn't. That is highly developed emotion. So the idea that reason has lost its passionate base is simply a blindness to what it is that has shaped us in that kind of way. And so part of the nature of what it looks like to bring theology and the sciences back together is to reinvigorate the nature of how we engage the world with all of the sensibilities of what it looks like to really be true to reality, which again is one of the sub-themes of this book. The re-engagement of reality requires of us that we be truly passionate again to get there. Ken, I see that hand.
Yeah, if maybe 20, 30 years ago, all of us would have been engaged in some kind of conversation about whether religion has a role in secular society. I propose to you that when one particular block of our society says, I have my facts, your facts don't matter. I will act on my facts. I will not regard your facts as facts. I will regard them as falsity.
Yeah.
Because you proposed them. That's passion. That's emotion.
Yeah.
And that is the language of logic and proposition, but it is pure political propaganda.
Yeah.
Those of us who went through the Protestant, Catholic, polemical warfare of the 1500s and 1600s watched how warm, intelligent, decent people, biblically informed, theologically literate, would go hammer and tongue against each other because they were on the wrong party.
Right.
We need to pay attention to what's going on in American society now, because even 20 years ago, almost all of us would say, you're entitled to your opinions, but you're not entitled to your facts.
Yeah.
At this point, people are saying, if you say they are not facts, that proves that you are wrong. You are actually heretical. I do not need to attend to you. I will attend to my facts, which I hold to myself, and I regard them to be true as a matter of religion.
Yeah.
So this that Iain Paul is expounding here is to say, once upon a time, it was possible for science and religion, that used to be polemical enemies, are now able to speak to one another because they are both passionately devoted to the truth.
Yeah.
Causes all of us to say, when there are all sorts of parties out there saying, this is my truth, this is my truth, this is my truth, we as a church need to be able to say, we have been through this before. We know what heresy looks like. We know what idolatry looks like. And what you are doing is heretical or idolatrous or schismatic, or supply the term. We really do need to be able to hunker down, claim our authority as people who have been through these kinds of polemical wars before and are now able to say, no, 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 no. As Iain Paul is able to step forward and say, no, 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 no. It is not true that science is utterly opposed to religion. Right. That is a false antagonism. And let me go through, and I will cite the authority of Albert Einstein, St. Albert of Einstein, St. Albert of Princeton, maybe, to say, no, you are wrong. And you really do need to go back and repent what you have said and rethink that again. At the moment, it is possible to do that in the area of theology because theology is currently not bearing the political baggage, the weight of some other things, like the political baggage about what to teach our children in high school or even elementary school, what to teach children about sexuality, what to teach our children about gender, all of these things. These are so highly politicized, they are suddenly not able to be talked about. But when Paul was talking, it was possible to say, let's talk about humanity and creation. Let's talk about the meaning of words and what is the word of God. This language was still usable, and he was writing sincerely. I'm sorry, he's dead and gone now, but he was able to say, Einstein told us that we can have all sorts of wrong ideas about all sorts of things, even about the nature of reality itself, but reality will kick back. Reality will say, you are a false prophet. Shut up. And a true prophet will rise up to say, this man is just bogus. Ignore him. This is idolatry. And so every time people say to me, why are you so confident? Why are you so chipper and happy? When somebody's able to say, well, there are facts and then there are alternative facts. Okay, but because the God of facts is not to be mocked. If you make allegations like that, number one, you will get divorced. And number two, your husband will go on an alternative network and tell you to your face, you are false. That is the kind of thing that happens in the real world where God defends God's honor.
Which the word reality is the word that gets used here. I mean, the word facts has its own issues to it.
Yeah.
But the word reality is what's
this is the only reality I'm willing to work with. The one that physicists are willing to be able to say, yeah, that's real.
Yeah.
Yep, that's real.
And the nature of the God revealed in the person of Jesus Christ. We want to say, the reality of that God is one who speaks to us. And I mean, you raise the other question is that the nature of politics as it is done today has ended up to be ideologies that often distract us from the facts. And McMurray calls those false emotions, where we get attached to the emotions of agendas that don't take us to reality and tend to drive us apart. So
and all
the
of
nature
all of the ideological polemic is based on your facts and my facts are equal. They have no basis in any reality below your opinion and my opinion, and your opinion to organize your folk, and my ability to organize my folk. And if I get more votes than you do, my facts win.
Right.
That is not science.
Right. And that's part of the dismantling of the prejudices that Torrance is pointing out in the beginning, that we end up prejudiced by groupthink and all that.
Yeah,
so the nature of science and theology is a call to come back to reality, I think, as you were saying.
And as far as the Arian controversy was concerned, I will remind you that there was a time when the Arian position was more popular than the Orthodox position. There was a time when the sun was not. That slogan was debated, mooted, and fought in riots in the streets. That is not how theology is done, by plebiscite,
by
popularity, by who's got more votes. Because truth is truth, not because it's popular, not because it's easy, not because it wins in the short term. It wins because in the long term, it is still true, because God is God. Right. So
we may have to have conversations along that. I mean, that's the question about quantum theory and string theory and chaos theory, is we may have to have the conversation to say, okay, give us your best shot, but in the end, reality will win. And it, as you say, it kicks back. It'll kick back. And so reality has its own authority, and the person of God is that reality too. And so people may say, well, I think God's like this and I think God wants that. But again, the reality of God is the ultimate grounding of the authority that's there, and not merely the opinions that we have about God. Now, Matt, I see you've got your hand up there. You've been patient. Give us your best shot there.
Just a quick Einstein story. When I was a student at Princeton Seminary, one of the staff members told a story about they went caroling into Einstein's house, and they sung outside of his house, and then he came. I think he came out. He was very friendly and welcoming, and then before they were going to leave, he just held up his finger and, wait, don't leave. He brought out his violin and played "Oh Holy Night." And they invited them in for hot chocolate and bonbons. Anyway, great story.
Wonderful. I love that. I love that.
Actually, hey Marty, that John McKenna told me a story about how Einstein was actually at one of Torrance's prayer meetings, and that was the thing. He wouldn't pray, but he would play his violin at the prayer meetings.
Wow.
I love it. That's there is a beauty, and I mean that's the artistic sense of the soul that's coming in, bringing a passion that may not have words, but maybe the violin says more than words could say at that moment. So thank you. That's beautiful. I'm moving on to chapter 2, scientific faith. And again, the word faith, as Ken noted earlier on, is a significant word to engage. And so to quote Einstein there, the belief in an external world independent of the perceiving subject is the basis of all natural science. And so belief there is not something that a person generally is choosing to believe. It's an acknowledged belief. We could go one step beyond with Polanyi, who I think uses the word commitment here. A scientist has to be committed to the idea that the world is there and that it is not all just an illusion, or they will not be able to investigate what's there. So to say that the word an acknowledgement or a commitment to what is there, that is a common ground on which both natural science and theology live, where acknowledged and a commitment to pursue that gives a basis for investigation that is worthy of both the disciplines doing what it is that they do. Be there, every scientific effort is bound up with an act of pre-reflective faith in the rationality of the universe. So it's not a pre-reflective faith in the sense of being a priori, but it's simply acknowledging the world is there, and there are days and nights, and there is water and land, and there are all these things. And so I'm going to acknowledge that there is something there, and before I say I have faith in it, I just accept that it is there. That's the acknowledgement, the acceptance of what is there. And so what Paul is saying here is that the nature of scientific, and in a sense it's scientific, both theology and the theological science, have this pre-reflective faith, just an acknowledgement that there is something there that allows me then to go on and investigate. So faith seeking understanding, until you've acknowledged there's something there, there's no way you're going to understand. And so it's not the leap in the dark kind of faith that people often put onto the word faith. I have no evidence, but I'll investigate anyway. That is not what is being talked about by Paul or Einstein or Torrance or any of them. The nature of faith is this acknowledgement of reality, period. And if you just deny that there's a reality there, at some level, there is a closing out that is, it's like seeing with one eye. You've lost your ability to see the dimension of what is there. You can do that, but words like blindness and living in the darkness are something that I think follows from that, which is why Torrance loves light so much. So faith motivates scientific research. That's on page 11, that's point C, to say when you acknowledge the world is there, then you have a desire to investigate it. So when you acknowledge that God is there, that God has come to us in the person of Jesus Christ, the question, who is this person, is a worthy question to be asked, to investigate. That is the theological pursuit that follows from acknowledging that God is there in the person of Jesus Christ. Or even just say, Jesus is there, who is he? is there any basis upon which to see that he is in fact God? And what God is it that he shows to us? I mean, all of those would live out of that faith-motivated scientific research. But in either case, the investigation is simply a indwelling and pursuing reality to better understand what is there. And as Einstein says in point D, only a life lived for others is worthwhile. And so when some people, and I have people who say this to me more often than I care to be comfortable with, I just believe in knowledge for the sake of knowledge. It's like, really? For me, I can't understand knowledge for the sake of knowledge. There is a curiosity, at least, in their knowledge that they want to understand, that they want to feel that they understand the world better than they would have understood it, that somehow serves them in their life lived with others. So, but to say overtly for a Christian, a life lived for others is worthwhile, that is the person of the God who comes in the person of Jesus, who sends the Holy Spirit. That is a life lived for others, and the worthwhileness of it is the fulfillment of God's very character as the God who loves in freedom, who elects to be for us and with us, and all those things that are the Bart Torrance themes of the gospel, Jesus clothed with the gospel that is for others. Science, to say science properly lived, and I'm thinking of Polanyi here. Polanyi was so frustrated with science in Hungary and under the communist regimes because science was simply serving the state. And he just felt like there was something essentially wrong if science is merely used as a tool of those who have power to further their power, that was the exact opposite, in a sense, of what it is that science should be. And this kind of parallels what Ken was just saying about politics. When science becomes political, then it becomes problematic, which doesn't mean that science can't serve humanity in a way that correlates with this line of Einstein's. And in a sense, that may be the ethic of a good science, is that it serves humanity. And McMurray picks up on that, saying, when scientists used Jews to do their experiments on, they had become immoral because they were no longer treating persons as persons. Their agenda for knowledge had become impersonal, even though it was being done on persons. Again, just playing out the sense, there is personal science that is a proper science, and there is impersonal science that, in a sense, has become immoral. It's serving another God and serving inhumane purposes. Point E, the givenness of the natural order allows scientists the personal freedom to explore. And so to say the nature of what it is that science should do and what we should be teaching our kids is the beauty of wonder and exploring the world, and to understand the God who made it and the joy of what it means to live within it and to serve one another within it, which seems to be something that Jesus really liked to do with children, and considering the lilies of the field and the birds of the air and all these things, is to live with a sense of wonder and all that, but to also understand the one who gives it life. E, the givenness of the natural order allows, I already said that one. If scientific faith motivates research, so scientific faith, again, is a scientist saying, it's there, I can see this there, I want to understand it more or do research. It does so by fostering trust in the reliability of the universe. So again, the whole nature of reality teaching us that as scientists and theologians, we come humbly to listen and to learn, to come up with, is this what's going on? Is that what's happening? Is this impacting that? Those questions help us to investigate more fully the reality in which we live and to better understand it and to serve reality better. Bryden put up, big pharma precludes others from setting adequate trials to explore other treatments, our science versus other. COVID revealed this dynamic horrendously. So yeah, the whole nature of, how could the church be better involved with the life of science to understand a moral caregiving that works out within it? And yet, again, the problem of utility, does it make money, is the moral of our day. Will it make me more money? Well, that's problematic for all kinds of reasons. And technique, what was his name? The Technological Society.
Jacques Ellul.
Jacques Ellul, yes. So,
Jacques
I mean, I think
Ellul.
Jacques Ellul pointed out many of the problems of this, the playing out of that. And Dwayne says, Dr. Easton would say, knowledge isn't for the sake of knowledge. It is to help us worship our Father better. And I'd say to serve his children better also, that there is this life of service to others that is part of science doing what science does best. So
sorry, Marty, if I can quickly say that my comment endorses Ken's long exposition, because
yes,
we seem to be trapped in a world of self-interest, collective self-interest, and how we break out of that, I really don't know, because it depends upon, well, that phrase, the available believable, Ricoeur's phrase, Paul Ricoeur's phrase. If it's not available, then how do we make it available? Well, perhaps it's a kind of a collective prayer and fasting that's needed to exorcise our current, modus operandi. I don't know. It's a
well, the biblical
trap we
concept,
see.
they knew these people to have spent time with Jesus. I mean, there's something about the authenticity of people who have spent time with Jesus, see how they love one another. I mean, I think all of these phrases, there is an authenticity of reality that comes about as people of faith live and reflect that.
Okay, Ken. Thank you, brother.
Available from outside our arguments. That's probably true. You mean God will be God in spite of us? Yes.
What a thought. What a thought.
And there is the 120 days of waiting of the event of Pentecost. I mean, we need a Pentecost of God moving in a way that brings the mighty acts of God into play in a way that are the givenness within which we work. And point G at some level is an echo of that. Reality promises to reveal fresh frontiers. The degree to which we as Christians live in light of the reality of who God is, the person of Jesus Christ who is with us and for us, and to submit to what is the Spirit calls us to do, which I'm working right now in 3-4 of the church dogmatics, the ethics of what it means to live before God, and that he really is saying you have to live every day acknowledging Jesus is present, that he is the one that created you, the one that has reconciled you, and the one who is redeeming you moment by moment. If you live in light of that reality, guess what? You will act differently because your reality is being shaped by who this God is, this God revealed in the person of Jesus Christ. So that is the fresh frontier, is to live in light of that reality at some level. So that's the end of chapter 2. Again, Bryden is throwing something in. Does anybody else want to say anything about scientific faith? Which again, that's the science of theology and the science of natural theology. Bill, I see that hand.
Yeah, it's back to that bottom of page 12. I just put up that quote for those that don't have the book. Einstein quote, beginning at the bottom of page 12.
Yes.
Whoever has undergone the intense experience of a successful advance in this domain, science, is moved by profound reverence for the rationality made manifest in existence. By way of the undertaking, he achieves a far-reaching emancipation from the shackles of private hopes and desires, and thereby attains the humble attitude of mind toward the grandeur of reason incarnate in existence, and which in its profoundest depths is inaccessible to man. Now, I realize this is translated from the German, but the word incarnate really got my attention there. I understand it's being used in the secular sense of embodiment, let's say. Yeah, but it's almost in a weird, I don't know if the word's ironic, sort of a way, prescient as a voice of secular science. Einstein is saying the mind toward the grandeur attains the humble attitude of mind toward the grandeur of reason incarnate in existence.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? I mean, didn't this incarnate reason, this reason in fact become incarnate?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in the spirit of the book, it opens, this phrase opens us to the conversation. I mean, to use the word incarnate opens us to the possibility of seeing that which is made available in the incarnate person of Christ and all that comes from it.
If you go back and read, this is a quote from Ideas and Opinions,
Uh-huh.
a 1973 edition that Paul references.
Uh-huh.
And if you look at that entire context of that quote, it's interesting because the rest of it goes, this attitude, however, Einstein continues, appears to be religious. In the highest sense of the word, it should be. Science not only purifies the religious impulse of the dross of its anthropomorphism, but also contributes to religious spiritualization of our understanding of life. And he goes on and talks about ultimately the priest should become. Are you familiar with that quote?
I am not familiar with that.
In Ideas and Opinions, where the priest should become the teacher, and ultimately, well, I have it right here. Just this, if you'll bear with me just one second. Einstein concludes, the further the spiritual evolution of mankind advances, this is spiritual evolution that, speaking of science, the more certain it seems to me that the path to genuine religiosity does not lie through the fear of life and the fear of death and blind faith, but through striving after rational knowledge. I'm thinking Torrance.
Torrance,
Isn't it, and that rational knowledge, of course, is he who has revealed the knowledge of the glory of God. In this sense, Einstein said, I believe that the priest, science, must become a teacher if he wishes to do justice to his holy educational mission.
Yeah.
That just, the word incarnated led to all of that in a certain. Yeah, that's just incredible to me.
It is incredible. I mean, as you are showing, there's much to be followed up in the bunny trails. From what is said in this book with Einstein and Torrance and others, there is so much rich seed planted here that opens the way for other discussions and to go, how does that which Einstein put out there for us continue to invite us into things even beyond what he said, which is, I think, what you're seeing here.
Yeah.
Through
the striving after rational knowledge. And it wasn't Torrance who said, it was Torrance who said it would be an act of sheer irrationality for me not to believe in God. It would mean my reason had become unhinged from its bond with real being.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Dwayne, I see your hand up there.
Yeah, actually, I put that up there before Bill put his thing up. I said, we need to rediscover the vocation of priesthood. And seeing that, I learned a lot of that from Jim Houston and and vicariously with James and Tom.
Yeah.
The Torrance, and because that's where our challenge is. We don't understand like what a priest actually is. If you're both a king and a priest, or a priestly king, you have to deal with the spiritual aspects and the way that knowledge that's invisible is mediated, but it also corresponds to the physical knowledge that's invisible, that's mediated. And so you inquire, and because everybody is like, you talk about the artists and stuff like that, like we misunderstand, for me, I just love driving, and the art of driving, I've got that down to a science. Both getting through the quickest way to get through space-time to get to the point.
Yeah.
You know, but everybody has those skills. We all have these manifestations, the way we engage in the creation, whether it's playing football, whether it's learning how to weld and how metals work, and you know, all these different areas are areas of the priesthood work, and that's what we've forgotten. So we need a community of people that understand, you know, and when you go through the church, you meet all these people, like you got bakers, you got butchers, you got cobblers and candlestick makers, and
Yep,
all
yep.
these people that do that work as praise and worship to God. And but our culture doesn't recognize that, and we as a church don't recognize that, because you see these people, they're amazing people that are just being themselves the way God, and that's the wonder that they have. You know, whether
Yeah.
it's you know, planting the garden or working animal husbandry and all these different things like that, because you can't do everything. You got to pick one thing, and as soon as you pick that one thing, you get funnel, where you eventually become an expert at that thing you're most passionate about.
Yeah.
It could be the smallest
They
things
could
like
all be
stamp
priests and
collectors, or it
scientists
could be
together. All of them could be integrated and learning that sense of what it means to live under the guidance of the Spirit in all that we do as wisdom and knowledge and living with the Spirit. Good. I'm going to press on here. I'm going to try and I'm going to be going a little bit faster, but I just want to hit the basic themes of the chapters before we end up here. So, Chapter 3, Scientific Knowledge, is to say that the nature of both science and theology is to be able to articulate, to have a knowledge that comes from engaging reality in such a way that our faith isn't a faith. It brings out something that we offer, in a sense, as a gift. It becomes instructive. It allows other people within the community to build on what it is that we know. And Einstein, point F there, I didn't write Einstein there, but this is an Einstein quote. Knowledge exists in two forms: lifeless, stored in books, and alive in the consciousness of men. So to say that too often the church has a lot of knowledge stored in books, but there is, and this corresponds, Dwayne, to what you were just saying, this lived life that's alive and lives out what it is that that knowledge is intended to bring to us. So the servant role, in a sense, is what knowledge is about, not an end in itself, but to serve. Chapter 4, Scientific Communication, is to say that part of the nature of what it is that science and theology does is it has to be able to communicate what it learns. Its knowledge can't be locked away in language that's inaccessible, or its hiddenness is, in a sense, keeping back from what it is that a faithful, passionate wondering has provided for us. So point D, where there is scientific faith, the scientific wonders of the world are published for all to ponder and appreciate. Where there is Christian faith, the miracle of Jesus Christ is proclaimed for everyone to know and share. And again, that could even be further integrated together to say those two shouldn't be that separate, in a sense. And the famous quote by Einstein, the whole of science is nothing more than a refinement of everyday thinking. The refinement is bringing to language these things that have been complex and distant and making them available so that people are more and more living in the light of reality and not the abstract thoughts that drive them into political and other prejudicial ways that take them away from the livingness of reality and being with and for one another. Chapter 5, the universe. The universe subsists in reason, wisdom, and skill, and is perfectly ordered throughout because God is over it and has ordered it as the reason or word of God. So that's an Athanasius, seeing the universe in its whole. And again, this is something that Polanyi, McMurray, Torrance all echo this sense that we have to see the whole of the universe in its unitary sense, and that the God who created it has given us this unitary sense, which again, as you mentioned, Bryden, the divine and contingent order, the nature of the God who has ordered it, and the nature of the contingency of all that follows from it, which again, Carrie Magruder says, that is the nature of science. It's not about a world of chance. It is a study of the contingency of a world that builds on the contingency of its orderliness. And again, for Torrance, going back to God. Point B there, like God, the universe is not a product of scientific imagination. And I've had people say to me, you Christians, I just can't believe in imaginary friends. And their assumption is that Christians basically are those who create an imaginary friend, which means that we've not done a very good job of what it is to simply proclaim and make known the God who is in fact there and acts and sustains the world as we know it. And point C, the contemplation of this world beckons like a liberation. And I soon noticed that many a person I had learned to esteem and to admire had found inner freedom and security in devoted occupation with it. That again is an Einstein quote. I forgot to put it there, but the whole nature of the liberation of the world when we stop trying to control and be me-centered, as I think Ken pointed out, and start living with a devotion to the world and one another and the God who created it, there is a falling back into orderliness with the order that is there. Moving on to chapter 6, universal unity. All scientific endeavor is pointless if the universe is not a unified whole, a unity. And again, within that, there is this whole sense of complexity that is there, but the universe, D, is a unified whole in the sense that the content of modern science is only a pale shadow of its unity. So we acknowledge, and this is the point that I think was made about all the other theories, the unity is there. We may not have discovered it yet, but we recognize that our thinking, i.e. our rationality, all lives in a discovery process of the unity of the reality that is there. And the same can be said for the nature of the God who is there. He is unified and yet is in three persons. In point G, in speaking of the universe, scientists of an Einsteinian persuasion are already committed to its rationality and to the intuitive relation, which is going to go on and talk about that intuitive relation. But it's because it's there and we intuit that there is order, it gives us a basis upon which to even do the very task of science. For scientists, the universe is real, rational, and self-disclosing. And I didn't write it there, but for Christians, God is real, rational, and self-disclosing. And our understanding of the universe is because God is the origin, the source of it all. Chapter 7, universal authority. Point A, most scientists tacitly acknowledge that the universe does what it does, is not answerable to science, and has an authority second to none. And this is again a point I think Ken was making earlier, that reality is going to be reality, and the question is whether or not we're thinking in line with reality. But we don't have the authority. Reality has the authority, and that is also true of God. People will think many thoughts and make claims about God, but in the end, only God can truly speak for God. Point D of chapter 7, according to Einstein, scientists have to deal not only with precise analysis and mathematical expression, but also with personal participation, which defies description. Objectivity resides in the natural order. And so, again, there's this whole sense that in the end, having a lot of precise analysis is not the ultimate end, and we don't get to it by being impersonal. This kind of points towards a Polanyian way of understanding. Ultimately, all science is personal knowledge, and ultimately is for the purpose of other persons. And the authority is not going to be the persons, the humans themselves. It will be the reality to which they point. I kind of think of John the Baptist pointing to Jesus in the Grunwald altarpiece there, the reality and that which points to it. Science is, in a sense, another John the Baptist. Chapter 8, the rationality of the universe. In many respects, point A, the rationality of the universe is to scientists what Jesus is to theologians. Both of them acknowledge that which is other than themselves. Both of them reflect upon it. And as Torrance says, reflecting on McMurray's statement, actually, rationality is simply a reflection on the nature of that which is other than ourselves. So for the scientist, point B, all knowledge of reality begins and ends in the experience of the rationality of the universe, including in the person of the God revealed in Jesus Christ, Logos, the Word, who is given to us. And the final point of that section, scientific faith is the decision to acknowledge the authority of the rationality of the universe and its creator, we might throw in there. Good science acknowledges its reasonableness, its ordering, and the one who gave it its being. Chapter 9, then, the intuitive relation. I thought it was an interesting statement, point A. Whereas Christians believe in the Holy Spirit, scientists of an Einsteinian persuasion believe in the intuitive relation. In other words, both of them are saying that there is not a disconnect from the world. For Christians, we believe the Holy Spirit opens us up to understand God and God's creative purposes and the orderliness of the world, that we don't see that in and of and by ourselves. And that a scientific person recognizes that they can't bring everything to the process. There is an intuition that continues to build and to inform as they are taught by reality, in a sense, and learn to pay attention, to listen well. And I can't remember who tells the story of the teacher who says to somebody, here's a fish, write all your observations down about it. And they bring it back and it's like, you haven't gotten even 1/10 of it, write again. And they just require them to go back again and again and to let the fish teach them to even properly observe. And Matt's comment earlier on of just the seduction of a quick answer, and how, well, it's a fish. What kind is it? I don't know. It's one I can eat tonight, is, about as much as we get. But to say that, a real investigative engagement allows us to really understand and to know the world. And at one level, it's a willingness to submit to the intuitive process for that to happen. Ken is writing up other things to consider Einstein's personal authority today. I don't know. I mean, I see Einstein quotes everywhere. I mean, he seems to still be the icon of a way of thinking that goes beyond that. But the point is well taken. Has Einstein still held his place? And is there anybody who's replaced him? Have the modern atheists replaced him? I don't think so. I think they have been largely shown not to stand. So I think Einstein still holds.
Actually, Marty, you have to look at Hawking. You got Hawking and Kip Thorne. Those are two students of the other Princeton scientist that did cosmology and quantum physics there at Princeton. I can't think of his name. He was Unitarian. Wheeler? Yeah, John Wheeler. Yeah. Yep. So all those guys
if they've replaced Einstein, though. I mean, I think they're broadening the conversation. I don't know if they've replaced him yet.
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of popular personality, because everyone goes back to A Brief History of Time, because they move the theory of everything together and then moves into string theory and all their various things. And that, I don't, because you cannot, how do you replace the foundation? But then you build on that foundation, and if people would, most people would be able to recognize Hawking in that whole Brief History of Time with the Big Bang and whatever else.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that's a whole other conversation. But I think the point of, I mean, I think these days, who out there is a Christian who's speaking in a way that the world listens? I mean, are they listening to Alistair McGrath? I mean, Bryden, you would have a sense maybe of whether that the world is listening to him. And N.T. Wright, Christians, some of them are listening to him, but is the world listening to N.T. Wright? C.S. Lewis was kind of the last of the great voices that transcended into the secular sphere, and people recognized his wisdom maybe. But these are really interesting questions about what does it mean to be Christians whose way of engaging the faith has a level of humility and profundity to it, that people say, this is not merely an arrogant person. They're trying to discover the nature of the meaning of the world, and they have a Christian faith that says something beyond that. So anyway, I mean, these are important questions. I'm going to keep on just finishing this here. The last point in 9H, in general terms, scientists humbly acknowledge that by the courtesy of the universe, their eyes have been opened through the intuitive relation to see the significance of its rationality. I thought that was a beautiful frame of way of recognizing that both theology and the scientists have this opening of the eyes to see that which is there, which is not immediately read off, and not everyone may see it, but it is there to be discovered. It's a very Polanyian kind of invitation as well. And then the final chapter, motivation in the community. Science does not lead to God, but it does not exclude him. I think that to recognize the battle is not there. We need not see a battle there is an invitation maybe beyond it all. And then that famous Einstein quote, which is one of my favorites: science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. And I love the compatibility of the two and the nature of the invitation to say, come, let's talk together here, and let's pursue reality without prejudices so that we can discover fully all that might be discovered. D, perhaps if the church were more outspoken about the creative role of theology and less critical of the pedagogic value of theology, it would become more convincing about the reality that theology is never a substitute for Jesus, who is the only answer to all men's needs. So again, a working together and not dismissing on wrong grounds may be important. And point E, Einstein acknowledged that religion provides the basic motivation for science, which again, basic motivations are things that are important here. It goes a little bit, Brian, back to your passion point. And we need the passion to really understand all of reality. And so we need scientists who do well what they do, because the world calls for that meaningful engagement with it. Point F, Christianity, in spite of its checkered past, provided the paradigm for intellectual freedom, integrity, and humility in modern science. Christianity taught science the value of tradition, that's the community and the passing on of history, and unfortunately demonstrated many of its abuses. And I think we're still getting over that. There is a credibility issue of Christians really speaking the truth in such a way, and we certainly know the problems with that on the news today, and people claiming to be Christians and yet not representing any values, or missing many of the values that we would hold to be true to the nature of the person of Christ. Yes, TikTok and influencers. I mean, all of these are big challenges. What is the present challenge? Bill notes on page 106, the last sentence, he, the scientist, places his hope in the rationality of verse, which he can only see dimly, the same rationality which begins and ends in the person of the Lord Jesus Christ. Yeah, again, you would hope that at the end here, that there would be this recognition that there's so much possibility of building together with open eyes, humble hearts. One of the reviewers said that he thought that every chapter ended with a trite ending of kind of a Christian capturing or something, but I found them to be quite meaningful invitations to recognize the value of humble working together. So sometimes we have to critique the critiquers and say, I think you're missing the point and the opportunity that is there. Just looking for any last point K, maybe on the final page. Scientific faith appears to be an intensely intellectual, individualized, solitary variant of the Christian faith, dealing with the non-moral universal order. It encourages scientists to develop an interest in things as opposed to persons. And so that's the wrong path. Modern science, point L, could reasonably be described as Christian theology operating in a different gear, still investigating the world for different purposes where it requires a different gear to work in, but still operating within the same world with the same outcomes of engaging, of understanding, of attempting to serve humanity through a faith that meaning is there and that we can live more fully and appropriately in light of that reality if we come and reason together. So that is a brief survey of many deep and rich pages. There's much that we missed, but there's also much on the table. Bryden's got his hand up. I was going to ask for any further final comments. So go ahead, Bryden.
Your lovely phrase a moment ago, critiquing the critics. John Polkinghorne's review, which you've echoed a couple of times and I mentioned, written in 1986, 87, I wonder if a more mature John Polkinghorne would actually write a very different review, because he was still at that stage in his kind of curacy mode. He's been recently ordained as an Anglican priest, Church of England priest. He hasn't fully fledged gone back into academia, whereas 15 years later or so, he's become far more interesting in his religious Christian science interface, and I think his review would be much softer and more humble and more open to what Iain Paul was trying to achieve here, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's a very hopeful thought. And I mean, it'd be nice to be able to follow up on that question and see if there are signs that that kind of happened. Another one of the reviews was by W.A. Whitehouse, and he was a bit critical of the book also, and in the end wasn't thoroughly engaged. There's a book called Creation, Science, and Theology by W.A. Whitehouse. On the cover of this is a quote by T.F. Torrance. Here in these essays, we are given profound and shrewd insight to which I constantly send my students and to which I myself return again and again to ponder and to learn. So again, this book was written, I think, a bit later also. So this whole, actually it was copyright in 81. So anyway,
I know
whole
it.
question,
No, I read it.
book?
I know it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question to which those people who review these books change their opinions, or that maybe we missed their point, or they're interesting questions that I think are rightly brought up as a continuing conversation. If there is a resistance at one point in time, is that necessarily a final point? Ken's holding up another book. What was that book, Ken? You're on mute still.
I've got
Open the video.
There was 6 Buckingham books. Obviously, Dr. Buckingham likes to publish books, short books that have to do with God and science. So, Belief in God in the Age of Science, Quarks, Chaos, and Christianity, Science in the Trinity, Living in Hope. A scientist looks at Advent, Christmas, and Epiphany. All right, topical. Exploring reality, the intertwining of science and religion, and science and theology.
Right.
And each time I look to see if
he mentions Torrance,
Dr. Paul. Did he mention
okay.
Paul? No, Dr. Paul is a very small pebble in a very big pool.
Huh.
Boom. For us, it made ripples and ripples, and we see a lot.
Yeah.
But I think in the end, it is mostly what we are going to see is the influence of Tom Torrance on scientists who began to explore theology as a real discipline.
Yeah.
And the obverse will be, did Tom Torrance have any influence on especially liberal theologians and evangelical theologians as they approached science? Because that seems to be the big blank wall against which, boom, any number of things have been thrown and nothing has stuck.
Yeah. And it's still a live question, and people like Carrie Magruder at the University of Oklahoma University, are hopefully part of that conversation forward. I'm looking and doing some research there at Oklahoma University and attempting to, continue that conversation of how Torrance helps us serve the world in which we find ourselves to create conversations that go forward. So, this book is it's a small pebble maybe in a large conversation. I'd love to get Carrie Magruder talking about Polkinghorne and what he has done in the current conversation with regards to Torrance. Has he leaned towards Torrance or away, or just running parallel, or what? I mean, those are interesting conversations. He certainly is cranking out the books, Polkinghorne is. So he's somebody worthy of the conversation, but I don't know him well enough. And I raised one point with Carrie at one point, and he said, we'll have to have a conversation about that at some point. So there is a conversation to be had that I think Carrie would be able to have with us. So we'll see about what that could look like.
Dr. Polkinghorne is coming at it as a Church of England Anglican, and
Correct.
Tom is coming in from a Church of Scotland Reformed theologian. And after almost 500 years, it still makes a difference.
And I don't know all the difference that it makes, but
next time.
I think I think the massive difference is the difference that actually Bill Ford put his finger on in terms of Alistair's lecture in 2016. The Church of England is a convenient place to operate out of, whereas Tom Torrance is a confessional theologian. And I think that's the big difference also with John Polkinghorne. There's a mindset about a kind of openness of a different kind with Anglicanism, or certain branches of Anglicanism. They're very content to kind of, you know, keep the door open, and it's a bit like a cat flap. Oh, that's a very pejorative description, but that's what it finishes up being, a cat flap. You can't quite control who comes in or out.
Right. Very good. Okay, well, I think we have covered a boatload of material. We have gone over or past a boatload, so feel free if there are things you'd like to comment on out of any of the other statements. I'm very happy to continue those conversations on the reading group page there, and I think people are engaging more and more these days, which I'm quite happy to see people putting up comments and questions there, because that means that we're being a community that is provoking thought and doing the work of scientific investigation in theology in a way that's true to what even today was all about. So thank you all for showing up today, and I will be at the LA Theology Conference next week. So I won't be here, I know. And so I'll be back in 2 weeks. I think I'm going to be doing for that. I'm going to be doing the introduction to this book by Karl Barth, Theology in the Church. There is a 40-page introduction to this written by T.F. Torrance in 1962. So I'm calling this a hidden treasure, because most people wouldn't find T.F. Torrance in this place. So I will be scanning that off, so you'll have that to read before we meet again in 2 weeks. And we'll look at in a sense, it gives you a read of Barth as well as Torrance together. So I think it's a helpful kind of thing on theology in the church. So hopefully that will be a fruitful conversation. So until then, farewell and au revoir, and
travel safe.
Adios.
Enjoy the conference.
I will. Thank
Cheers.
you much. Blessings on you.
Bye.
Bye.